What's up, nerds? It's your boy, a very happy OG coming to you live on a lovely Thursday morning here at Site B. It's about 10:30 in the morning on the 20th day of April 2023, and it does seem that for the moment, spring is here. And there's a spring in my step for reasons you might discover later on, but that has absolutely nothing to do with this story. This story comes to us from Bob Worldbuilder. Bob Worldbuilder, as you know, was one of the people who were invited to the creator content conference thingy that was held at a Ramada Inn in Washington. And Bob was very open that he did sell out. Gotta love you, Bob, but we know I'll sell out. And he told us how much he felt Wizards of the Coast paid for the whole entire thing, what he got out of it. And then he went into detail about the various things that happened, including the point where Wizards of the Coast lost control. Now, I'm not going to go word for word over this because I'll just post a link to Bob's video down below. And I'll post the link to Double D, who did a whole video on this last night and gets into much more depth. Instead, I'm just going to focus on a couple things that Bob let slip, whether intentionally or unintentionally. Now, I'm not familiar enough with Bob Worldbuilder's content yet to really have a definitive opinion of him based upon his interview with Kyle Brinks, the video he made before the conference and the video he made after the conference. He does seem on the favorable for Wizards of the Coast. I'll forgive them no matter what they do because I'm a WOTC shill side of the fence. But we also know that he was one of the many people who vehemently were against Wizards of the Coast during the OGL nonsense, but then quickly jumped back on the pro Wizards of the Coast bandwagon once the OGL nonsense was over. But the few times I've listened to him talk, I have noticed he tends to slip in some interesting tidbits that may show that the Bob the Worldbuilder we see on the screen and Bob the Worldbuilder, the real person, might not feel and think the same, which is pretty standard, I think, for these post-Ginny D pro Wizards of the Coast 5e YouTubers who have actually been professional about it. They create these characters, much the same way the OGGM is a character, and then they occasionally hint at what the real person, thinks. And Bob has dropped a couple words of wisdom into his maybe actual thoughts about the whole situation, as opposed to what YouTube Bob the Worldbuilder is expected to say to remain on the favorable side of Big Brother Wizards of the Coast. Now, he did repeat several times that he did not feel it was his place to ask questions at this point in the conference. I didn't feel it was my place to ask this question. I'm kind of an introvert, so I didn't really ask a lot of questions. Dude, that was literally your job, to ask questions. Of course it was your place. That is why you were there. Now, Bob did let us know that in regards to who was invited, very few actual Dungeons & Dragons content individuals were invited. Bob, Nerd, Immersion, Dungeon Dad, Indestructible Boy. There were a couple of, my side of the YouTube fence, but a lot of them were actual play people, cosplayers, game designers. There was that one chick who only had 7 followers. She was invited. Connie Chang, who is vehemently opposed to Wizards of the Coast, was invited. So, yeah, those of us who actually talk about Wizards of the Coast news and Dungeons & Dragons news and tabletop role-playing game news, we were the minority. Most of it was people Wizards of the Coast felt would say nice things about 5e, so actual play people and cosplay people. Now, I'm not sure why you would invite Connie Chang and her ilk, people who have been vehemently opposed to everything you do, and think they would say good things about you. But I guess what they were hoping is that, hey, look how we've changed, look what we've done, and Connie Chang and the others would go, oh yeah, we see now. We were sorry about every horrible thing we've said about you for the past couple years. We forgive you. I guess that's what they were hoping. That didn't happen. So there were several points when, as we know, Wizards of the Coast completely lost control of the proceedings. And the main one, of course, was when they got to talking about the inclusion and the representation, and the inclusion representation crowd took over. In fact, took over so much that the conference lasted an hour plus longer than it was supposed to. They were only there an actual day plus. And eventually the hotel had to say, look, get out. We need this room for something else. So, yeah, that, and Bob, slipped some things in there that maybe, this is what he was really feeling. He kept saying how these people are upper level champions of inclusion and representation, and Wizards of the Coast kind of lost control when these people started talking about inclusion or representation. Well, we were waiting for Wizards of the Coast to actually talk about the game. We didn't really care about the VTT because we'd already seen the VTT thing a week before at the D&D Direct thing, and everything Wizards of the Coast was showing them up to now was the exact same stuff. In fact, some of them even got to play the exact same thing we saw them play at the D&D Direct thing, which is an alpha test mock-up of what they think it will look like when it's finished. It's not the actual VTT, and it was only like a 20-minute thing, and it was pre-programmed and whatever. They had very little control, and it was glitchy, and a lot of people wanted the specs and didn't get them, and blah, 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 blah. But that was definitely, people wanted to talk about the future of the hobby, their plans for 2024, and why they let the OGL disaster happen. But instead, Wizards of the Coast allowed the Connie Chain crowd to take over the conference, and it became a shooting gallery. And Bob felt it wasn't his place to interject because, Bob, it was your place to interject. That's why you were there. So, let us ponder for a second. Wizards of the Coast, what did you think you were going to happen when you invited people like Connie and the others to come to your conference, people who are vehemently opposed to you and everything you do, who vehemently have complained nonstop about everything you've tried to do, will find fault in everything you do, and will wave the inclusion representation flag over anything that Wizards of the Coast does. These angry people who came in with this agenda, and what did you think would happen? Now, another telling thing that came out of Bob's interview, and this is the one that I think is most important to me, is our friend, our genius, the master of the media that is Kyle Brinks, during the Q&A with him talking about, the people that were invited. Kyle said, well, it's obvious that the people who are here now are people who came to D&D because of 5e. The people that we're representing now are people who came to D&D because of 5e. We're only representing the people who've been playing since 2014. The people here now, the people who have taken the surveys, are only people who came to D&D because of 5e. Well, of course they did, Kyle, because the only people you invited were people who came to D&D because of 5e. The only surveys you've been reading are the surveys that were posted by people who came to D&D because of 5e, and the crowd you are trying to manipulate are people who have came to D&D because of 5e, and the people who you felt would say nice things about you going forward in relations to whatever you have planned for the VTT, D&D Beyond, and the 2024 D&D, whatever it is. Now, week does come out of the end of the conference with Bob still having very little information as to why the OGL thing happened, what Wizards of the Coast was thinking, why it took so long for them to apologize, why they made so many mistakes, and we still have no bloody clue what to expect in 2024, other than the Player's Handbook will be bigger than the previous Player's Handbook, and it'll be predominantly dominated by art. Every class will have class-specific art. Every subclass will have subclass-specific art. Every background will have background-specific art. Every species will have species-specific art. I assume the weapons and other stuff will have specific stuff to them. So there will be 20% actual understandable content that is appropriate to the game in the new Player's Handbook, and the remaining 80% is going to be art and fluff. Thank you, Wizards of the Coast. Thank you. But we don't have to buy it if we don't want to, because all that stuff is going to be eventually available in the SRD. Well, the dumbed down version will be in the SRD, like the Player's Handbook is now in the SRD. Well, the dumbed down version of the Player's Handbook is in the SRD. The Monster Manual is going to be the biggest Monster Manual ever. It's going to include everything post-Tasha and all the other stuff that they've done. So those of you who already have the Dragon Book and whatever, you wasted that money for nothing because we're redoing it. But don't worry, it's backwards compatible, except of course it's not. It's going to be the largest we've ever done because they've never done a big Monster Manual. Unless you count the Monstrous manual they made with, remember that had the 3-ring binder and you put in the things. That thing was freaking huge. But this one will be the biggest thing they've ever done. And the new DM's guide, which we've already talked about. They're not going to release them together. Oh, no. They're going to peter them out during 2024. That way, if one doesn't sell very well, they can judge what's going to happen. And of course, they mentioned, all the things that they said about the new policies going forward and the little hints that Chris Perkins dropped. We've talked about that in the past. So I'm just going to sum this up by saying, Bob did a thing. Bob admitted he sold out. Bob got a swag bag, and the swag bag sounds like it sucked. He got 2 books that he's going to give away. That's, that's worth it. But then the rest of it was just like, wow, bottom of the barrel stuff. But yeah, the 2 books were probably worth it. And, he did have a breakfast. He did have a room. They did fly him out. They did Uber him to a game store. They gave him gift cards. They did feed them. They gave him drink cards. So yes, he was wined and dined. And, his Shillometer equaled about $2,000. So link down below if you want to watch the whole thing. Link down below if you want to watch Double D talk about this. The things coming out of this for me, of course, are the fact that what did you expect would happen when you invited people that were hostile to you to this convention? And, of course, openly admitting that the only people you're actually trying to kowtow to are the people who came to D&D because of 5e. And of those, only a specific subsection of those, and it's not game combinators. People like me and Bob are not the target audience anymore. Cosplayers and actual players are the target audience. People who don't really play D&D are the target audience. Thanks, Bob. Thanks, Kyle. Thanks, Chris Perkins. Thanks, D&D. And now back to your regularly scheduled nonsense. Hey, did you see the story that Critical Role announced they're making a fucking role-playing game? What?